Step into the digital dream where pixels come alive. AI paints pictures in real time. Watch the future thrive. Claude and ChatGPT, the code ignites.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Last Week in AI, where you can hear us chat about what's going on with AI. And as usual, in this episode, we will be summarizing and discussing some of last week's most interesting AI news. I'm one of your regular hosts, Andrei Kurenkov. My background is that I studied AI in grad school, and I now work at a generative AI startup. And once again, Jeremy is out due to Thanksgiving and presumably also more travels and more work on his side. So we once again have a guest co-host, and it is once again Gavin Newsom. And
I've made it. Yes, I'm the governor of California, and I appeared. My name is Gavin Purcell. Andre.
See, it's the morning. I'm messed up. I've been thinking too much about California. Clearly,
it's all right. Gavin and I get confused a lot. It's one of those sort of things. But yes, hi everybody. My name is Gavin Purcell. I've been here before, but I am the co-host of a podcast called AI for Humans, which you can find on your audio formats or on YouTube. And my background is media. I was a showrunner for The Tonight Show for a while, and then fell into the AI world, and I'm involved in a bunch of weird startup stuff, but mostly have been kind of following this space, and specifically from the media angle. And there's a lot of fascinating media things that are happening in the AI world. Not just Ben Affleck. There's a lot more.
There is quite a lot, yeah, and I do enjoy following it. I'm glad I'm the one who edits this podcast, and I could just edit it out and pretend.
No, you gotta leave that in. I love being this.
I probably will. It is a fun little brain fart. But yes, it's exciting to have you on this week, as you'll see. Is very heavy on tools and applications as far as news stories. I don't know why, but there's just a ton of stories on that front. And on your podcast, that is sort of your wheelhouse, is sort of the AI that people can use in their daily lives or for fun. And we'll be talking a lot about that in this episode. So
we really specialize in trying to make it a little bit more accessible for, I wouldn't say the full normie audience, because the normie audience is maybe a few steps behind, but for the super curious kind of non-technical techie person. But we do find techie people like us as well, mostly because Kevin and I say dumb things. So that's part of what happens.
Yeah. And you have a pretty fun show, I feel like.
We try.
You have some demos sometimes. You have your AI co-host, which I found delightful. So, it's a fun time. And before we get into the news, as usual, I want to give a shout out to some listener comments and reviews. Couple new reviews here. Must listen for AI news, sharing about helpful things and skills to learn as an AI engineer. So that's always nice to see. And we do have a very detailed one that I really liked. It's titled The Indispensable AI Podcast. Turns out from a tech CEO at an AI startup. I wonder if I've met you in the Bay Area. But I have read your review. There's actually one request, which is to keep covering the state of Meta and Gemini and how they compare, which I think is a good one. We haven't touched on Gemini's quality in a little while. Just to touch on it a little bit, I will say that I try Gemini every now and again, and I always come away disappointed and kind of confused as to why it's lagging, at least for my applications that are more coding heavy, a little typically more long context, documents, etc. I haven't found it to be as good. I don't know what your experience is.
Honestly, I feel the exact same, and I there's part of me thinks that somebody at Google should be held directly responsible for what's going on with Gemini, and I don't want to crap on them because I know Logan Kirkpatrick is very active in trying to promote it, and they come out with stuff that's kind of edgy on the boards, but what I mean that is they're performing well, but every time I use it, I'm pretty disappointed. I used Gemini Live recently because they just released an iOS app, and it's just the divide between where OpenAI's advanced voice is and that is so wide. And I don't understand how a company that's as big as Google could be fumbling it this much, but I feel bad for saying that in some ways, but it does feel like that every time I open it, I'm not getting the results out of it that I want.
Yeah, it's kind of weird to me and maybe surprising because they do have a great team at DeepMind. They have a lot of hardware, etc. But the Gemini isn't bad per se. It's a powerful chatbot, maybe equivalent to Meta Llama 70B or 400 that I haven't tried, but just compared to both Anthropic and OpenAI, it's kind of worse every time, which is...
Oh, I do want to shout out one thing. Speaking of Google, I know that this is like a random thing, but there's a guy named Josh Woodard yesterday, who is the VP of labs.google at Google, who posted a thing where basically, and this is, by the way, this was super fun, and I wish they would do more of this, but it's a thing called Gen Chess. Have you heard about this at all?
No.
Gen Chess basically is a small, dumb little thing they created, which allows you to create chess pieces, like play a chess game out of generative prompt chess. So I created a hot dog set versus a sushi set, and each little pawn is a hot dog, and it's a very fun, like, little toy that I was like, now this is cool. This felt like something, of course, that doesn't matter in the larger scheme of things. No one's going to use Gen Chess to like improve their business, but like that felt like, oh, it's like a notebook LM. Like it was like, maybe that's what Google is going to be good at, is this weird little spinoffs. Unfortunately, a lot of those aren't going to be businesses, which might be a big problem for Google going forward.
Yeah, I think just to say one more thing on this topic, it is probably the case that Gemini is good enough that the integrations of it into various Google products will be very useful. So like the Gmail summaries, the autocomplete, the summarizing of your like voice notes, meeting notes, etc. Google does benefit a lot from having their own LLM to use
Docs, Google Docs, it's a big part of it, right? In Google Docs, you can use it to write or complete sentences and things like that.
So, yeah, exactly. So using Gemini by that route, I could see being very useful. But as an alternative to ChatGPT or Claude, it is just not as good.
It doesn't work. I mean, I shouldn't say it doesn't work, but I just never go back to it. I never go back to it now.
Yeah, exactly. And then... the other thing this review has, which is pretty beneficial, is a little kind of guide on how to compare different image generators. I don't know, Gavin, if you've listened in. Every time we cover a new image generator on the podcast lately, we're like, I can't tell if this is better or not because they all look really good now. And so this review goes into kind of the metric now is not so much image quality, but prompt adherence and the ability to do exactly what you want, which is true. And on that front, it's kind of still hard to tell, but there's definitely a difference between different ones.
The other thing I would say about image generation that makes a difference to me, weirdly, is UX now. And I know that sounds crazy. Most people are like, it doesn't matter what the UX is because but truthfully, that's how people are going to use it. And I think that ideogram, surprisingly, is I think now becoming my favorite image generator. Midjourney, I've been paying for, and I probably am going to cancel my subscription soon because Midjourney's UX, it's better now that it's a desktop app, but it still feels like I'm not getting the results I want out of it. Whereas with ideogram, it's pretty good. And then Flux, obviously, so many people are building UXs for Flux. I'm sure we'll talk about some of this stuff today. Dream Machine's new open thing, but like, Flux is amazing and prompt adherence is really good, but like I have yet to have like the perfect UX experience with it. But I think that's why UX weirdly is like maybe the future of this stuff. It's the same thing with LLMs. It's like as things get better and faster and more same across the board, it's going to be how do people implement it more than it is like what the actual thing is doing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. It's going to be the case that, it's less about the technology and more about how useful it is to you in practice. And there's a lot
it's almost like the steel beams of a building are still steel. It's really what the building around it looks like and where do you want to be in it, right? Like that's kind of the vibe that I'm getting eventually. It's like the pipes work and deliver the water. Then what am I drinking out of?
That's right. So yes, thank you for that detailed review with a request and note. Very useful to us, and do feel free to send or comment long things. It's always nice to read. And just one last thing before we get to discussing the news, we do have our sponsor to promote, as we have recently. It is the Generator, which is the interdisciplinary AI lab focused on entrepreneurial AI from Bobson College. Bobson is a major school for entrepreneurship in the US, ranked very highly. And last fall, professors from Babson partnered with students to launch this generator lab that has various focuses like in AI entrepreneurship and business innovation, AI ethics and society, AI arts and performance, and more stuff like that. So they do work across these kind of categories. They peer train the faculty in AI concepts and AI tools. And they love a podcast, actually. So that's why they reached out and had us promote them as a sponsor. Most recently, they had a generative AI and writing symposium that they hosted, and they had different representatives from major universities like Harvard, MIT, Northeastern, and Tufts. So kind of that gives you a taste of what they're up to. It's a pretty interesting initiative, and I'll be curious to see what comes out of it like that. Alrighty, and finally getting to the news, starting with tools and apps. And the first story is fresh off the press. We're recording a little later than usual, so this is a Wednesday. And I think just yesterday, this was announced or kind of covered that OpenAI's Sora video generator appears to have leaked. So the way it has leaked, unfortunately, I was excited first because I was like, are the weights open? But the way this happened is that there was an interface on Hugging Face that you could use to generate 10-second videos. And it seems to be the case that there was someone who had access to the API who could submit requests to generate videos, and they were unhappy with some of the things that OpenAI is doing. So there was this group that calls themselves Sora PR Puppets that has claimed that OpenAI pressures testers to promote Sora positively and criticize it as PR focused and not really artist friendly. So it seems to be the case that someone in that kind of vein has done this. And as a result, access to it was shut down pretty rapidly, but yet again, an exciting story of drama arising from OpenAI.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple things to talk about here. One is what the outputs look like, and then two is kind of like my larger conversation, I think, around what Sora means to OpenAI. I think let's start with what the outputs look like. Is like they look pretty good. Like I think I had heard from the back end that like the Sora was like, not as good as like what we had been seeing with Runway Gen 3 or with Llama or with Minimax, specifically the Chinese models. I think there's a lot to like here about the outputs that you see. And, there's a lot of really cool things that came out of it. There is some like, funkiness to it. And just so everybody knows from what I've heard, this is a new Sora model. It's called Sora Turbo, right? Which allows people to make stuff faster, because the word on the street also is that when Sora first came out and artists had access to it, a 1-minute video took like 10 hours to generate. I don't know if that's exactly the case, but like some crazy amount of time to make it. So this is a turbo model. And I think overall, like I'm pretty impressed by it. I would love, obviously this is, I've never had access to Sora. We've interviewed somebody on our show. One of the artists had early access and they had an interesting experience with it. And I've actually talked to the people at OpenAI at dinner the other night where I was across the table from somebody, a woman who works with creators at OpenAI. So like, I know that they do care deeply about creators there. So I think that's one thing that's a little tricky here. I think the bigger question to me is, what does Sora mean to OpenAI? Mm-hmm. Because here's what I'll say as somebody in the entertainment business. AI video is a pretty big headache when it comes to both legal ramifications and sorts of like partnerships that might come out of this. Now, OpenAI, as most people know, is already facing lawsuits by the New York Times and all these other people for their training of their data that is text. I think Sora opens up a whole nother large set of problems for them. And my gut tells me the way they have been pitching Sora is not as a consumer product per se, as much as it is a professional product. So they don't have to deal with some of those headaches. So what's interesting here is this idea that you might have just been like the people that control Sora within OpenAI. And by the way, OpenAI is a very large company now. It's much bigger than it was when Sora first premiered. And there might be like some people there who are like kind of iron fisting what people can say and what they can't say about it. that never goes well for companies. You know what I mean? Like when you never goes well for a company to say like, you can only say good things. Like, if you watch the history of what Marquez Brownlee has done to companies across YouTube, that that's the case. I think what's going to be interesting here is I would just like them to come out with it and say, here's Sora. And I think, let us play with it, obviously. I think the thing that they might be worried a little bit about it is that it may not compare as favorably to the very top level of the Chinese models, particularly. But we don't know that yet. You know what I mean? The results, some of the videos I saw were amazing. Like what it feels like in a lot of ways is like Sora is much better at the kind of like stock footage prompts than even Gen 3 or anything else is. Like clearly it's got a lot of stock footage background. I love the artist videos that have come out through the OpenAI channel, like the official one. There's an amazing artist named Nice Aunties that makes these incredible surrealistic AI videos about her, this kind of like Korean grandma kind of vibe. That stuff is so cool, but I don't think anybody really knows until they release it. And I'm trying to figure out, I don't know, Andre, what do you think? Is this going to make it less likely to come out, or is this more likely now that they're going to drop it?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I realized, I don't know if I actually mentioned what Sora is, so hopefully all the listeners already know. Sora is the video generator from OpenAI that they first showcased, I think, at the beginning of this year. Yeah. And at the time, that blew everyone's mind because it was by far better than anything we've seen in video generation. As you've said, since then, you've seen a lot more come out. At the time, there was really no publicly accessible way to generate videos. Now you have things like Llama, things like Runway that do a pretty good job, and especially do it like in a usable way where it's fast enough that you can actually use it for stuff. And in that time, OpenAI has been pretty quiet on Sora. They have, gone to some people in Hollywood, have done these like private partnerships, but they haven't showcased many new results and they haven't kind of talked about it much in general. And I do think there's a reason for that. One of the reasons, as you said, is this whole legal angle of they already are in trouble for using some data. So it's definitely trained on copyrighted data.
Oh, it has to be, right? Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
So I doubt they want that. And to me, the other angle on that front is that I just don't see much of a benefit for them to release it as a tool.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because they have ChatGPT, that's printing money at this point.
That's their business. Do you know what I mean? Like that's their business. And Sora's expensive, I bet, to generate, right? So like do they really need another giant like compute drain right now? I'm not sure if they do,
Yeah, and the other thing is like, unlike image generation and ChatGPT, video generation is one of these things that to most people will just be a novelty. Unless you're a creative professional and you can use it for something like maybe as a YouTuber, as someone who makes Instagram reels, or as someone who works, on more professional productions and you want to get cheap B-roll, a very specific B-roll.
You're telling me that making baby Joe Rogan talk to baby Terrence Howard isn't a professional job, Andre? That's what we do on our show.
No, that's what I mean. Is that those are the people who use it and pay for these things. But that's a relatively small amount of people. No,
very small. You're right. Absolutely. It's a very small audience. Yeah.
Exactly. So, OpenAI, I think the upside of productizing it is very small. And they don't need to like show off anymore that much, but they are the leader in AI. So that's...
In some ways it's almost the opposite. Like if they came out and it was kind of underwhelming, it might like tarnish them a little bit, right? Like I don't mean like right now, as we all know, AI is a big hype game. And part of OpenAI's hype is that they are the cutting edge. They have some version of a moat, even though if it's real or not, we don't know. Obviously, hopefully talk a little bit about DeepSeek and all the 001 stuff, or you maybe already talked about that. But like the idea that like if OpenAI comes out and it's fine and it compares to like, okay with some of the more cutting edge models, that's probably not great for their company. And if they don't need it, maybe it's not a thing they do, right? And so maybe this leaking is weird in that way because they weren't planning on this. So that could be a thing as well too.
Right. And going back to your question of what does this leak mean? Are they more likely or less likely to make it more public? It's hard to say, but my guess would be is that this would prompt them to be even more cautious of Sora than they already are. This approach of handing out access to certain people has now backfired. And my guess is they'll keep doing it and be even more strict or even more careful.
The last thing I want to say about this is that if you read the artist's statement on the Hugging Face page, it's interesting because, it's a conflicted thing with these artists who want to use AI tools, but then they're often trained on copyrighted work or other artists' work. And I think even in that statement, you can read into some of that, right? Like, I think that there's going to be this ongoing conflict in artists' minds about, like, do we trust these corporations and like what the messaging of this is, which is like, why like open source tools are really interesting. And I know we're a long ways away from it. There's a new open source video model out there, I think called LTX, which is interesting, but it's not amazing. I do think eventually like open sourcing video and audio tools is going to lead to probably interesting stuff. But right now we're still kind of under the thumb of these giant corporations.
Yeah, definitely. And that statement on Hugging Face is pretty fun to just look at. It's
you should read it for sure.
Yeah, it's fun. The gist of it is that these appear to be some artists that have received access, and instead of being testers and creative partners, they say that they are being lured into art washing to tell the world that Sora is useful for artists and kind of like, saying that it's good and not criticizing it, which they call corporate art washing. And that's the motivation here. Alrighty, moving on. The next story is about Mistral and some updates from them. So first, they have now Pixtral Large, an update to their multimodal model that was first released last year. So it's a better one, able to sort of process images and deal with image inputs. And then secondly, I think the bigger deal is there's been a large upgrade to LeChat, which is their platform for using their LLMs, very much like the ChatGPT web interface or the Claude web interface. And so there's a lot of updates to this web interface. They have added image generation, web search, and interactive canvas. They have document and image analysis, and they say even task agents. So they seemingly in one fell swoop added kind of all the stuff that ChatGPT and Claude have been adding gradually over the past year. Stuff like Canvas, which of course now is both on ChatGPT and Claude, this thing that is a nicer interface for working with documents and editing them and so on. You get a little like side view of the output instead of being it inline. And then, of course, web search is for your question, it will search for web and provide citations. And it really does seem like they're trying to frame it as being competitive with ChatGPT, which I kind of wasn't feeling earlier. To me, it felt earlier they were more competing for the API access for people to pay for their LLM. But with this move, they seem like they might want those kinds of users, which is interesting.
I think that this is I'll call it the great reframing of AI companies when it comes to this, right? What I think is going on, and by the way, I'm not a business person per se. I've been around businesses quite a bit and think about product quite a bit throughout my career. But I think everybody's trying to kind of jockey now for where they're going to sit in the kind of stack of where the money gets made, right? And I think that's an important thing. Like if Anthropic and OpenAI become like the kind of API tubes, like in some ways, like, and Meta is obviously going to make their own version of like Llama sort of APIs as well. Mixtral kind of is in a weird place, right? Like it's this amazing, like, open source. I think it's open source, right? It's designed to be open source company based in Europe. So it's a slightly different thing, but maybe that's at a disadvantage for them based on how the European AI rules are. But I think they all have to start differentiating themselves a little bit because there's a real argument. I'm sure you covered this on the pod, but like ChatGPT bought that, chat.com as their URL, right? Because ChatGPT is very quickly becoming the kind of Kleenex of AI, right? Where it's like everything might go through OpenAI for the mainstream. So Mixtral and all these other companies have to start like kind of differentiating themselves in some ways. So like, I wonder if this is their first step towards that to try to be like LeChat, so it's LeChat is like maybe an alternative version to what ChatGPT is trying to become. Whereas Anthropic is trying, I feel like, to be something slightly different. Like Anthropic keeps pushing forward these kind of interesting, computer tools and all these things that feel like they're going to be be big for developers in a significant way. I don't know. This is such an interesting thing to me, but like we're getting to the point where the consolidation's probably going to happen. And a company like Mistral could conceivably be on the outside of that, I think.
Yeah, they have a real challenge with respect to providing an API that is competitive with OpenAI's because it's a little bit a race to the bottom at this point.
Yeah, exactly. Especially with open source tools, right?
Exactly. With open source tools, with API tools in general, right? OpenAI, Google, and Anthropic are all able to provide pretty cheap, probably unprofitable rates at this point, which is very hard to compete with. So you're right. Maybe one angle they could go is for more of this consumer kind of everyday usage. And that goes back to a point you've made, which is one important aspect of these chatbots that wasn't the case a year ago is the user experience with stuff like Canvas and I guess image generation, being able to do web search. All of this is kind of development in the user experience of using LLMs as a chatbot over the past year. So there is space to compete there, and with these kind of additions, they are at least positioning Let's Chat as competitive.
Yeah, my thing is, I lived through Web 2.0, old enough to be there and be part of it. And I think the interesting thing about what Web 2.0 was is it felt like it was layering on the better use case scenarios onto what the internet was, right? Like the internet kind of came up in the 90s, and then Web 2.0 kind of brought forth interesting like dynamic UX and UI, and suddenly like you could have things where like Dig, where you could upvote things and people could share things, and it feels like that's the transition that we're coming into in the AI space a little bit, is like where do we go from like the raw information being put places to now it's going to get a little bit nicer and better use cases.
And moving on to the lightning round, where we'll try to go faster. We have like 10 more stories in this section.
Okay, let's blow through them. Let's blow through them.
Yeah. So first up, we have some new stuff from Microsoft. They had their Ignite 2024 presentation recently, and they announced kind of a major thing was the notion of AI agents. So they're adding these things that they call agents, which aren't agents in the same sense that we've talked about before. So some examples here are you have an interpreter agent that is a real-time translation tool for Teams meetings, a facilitator agent that is basically a note taker and summarizer for Teams meetings. They have one for SharePoint that deals with data storage and analysis, some employee self-server stuff. So they are calling these agents, these feel like just more features of these products. They aren't agents in the sense we've been talking a lot about, which is, you have an AI thing that you give some instructions and it goes off and does stuff for you. These are more like toggles, features you can use throughout Microsoft products.
Do you know what this is about? This is about Mark Benioff's statement that said that like Microsoft's AI doesn't matter, that the future is all about agents. So Satya Nadella says, hey, I've got to start saying the word agents. But I do think like agentic AI, I feel like is going to be probably the story of 2025. I mean, Sam Altman and Dario from Anthropic have said as much. But like, to me, this is the thing to pay attention to. We just covered this on our episode that came out today, which was like the 3 biggest trends of 2025. And I think that, true agents are going to come. And I think getting people used to the idea of computers doing stuff is important. But I agree, these are kind of like more features than anything else.
Right. So like technically a real-time translator is an agent in the sense that it like is there with you doing stuff. So you can call it that. It's not entirely wrong, but it's just different from how it's being used typically. And speaking of agents, we're going to talk about a startup now, H, which is based in Paris. They raised 220 million earlier this year, and they have now launched their first product called Runner H, which is meant to be used for agentic applications. So they have their own compact LLM with 2 billion parameters, and they have now an API for both pre-built and custom agentic applications. So they're, I guess, arguing that this would be useful for things like e-commerce and banking, where you can apply, different sort of business processes, like dealing with forms and templates, quality assurance, stuff like that. So yeah, interesting. Again, an example there where it's not trying to compete on LLM access exactly, not introducing a new chatbot, introducing something that is more tailored to businesses, which makes sense.
This is all going to happen, and I think it's interesting. Like, one thing I will say, I had dinner with a very large person, a very big person in the investment/AI space a couple weeks ago, ostensibly like one of the biggest, and he was saying the agentic companies that are coming out is just become very hard to invest in because there are endless amounts of them. I think these are always interesting stories. I think a little bit it might be a race to the bottom as well with these things. Like, I worry for these companies that, like, why can't OpenAI and Anthropic introduce these themselves in some form, and then suddenly the entire company is gone? Now, granted, maybe these companies are all working with these APIs, so maybe their UX, as we talked about before, will be better than those companies. But I just see it's tricky to imagine a ton of these succeeding, and the best ones will be the ones that just make it easy, I feel like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, it's an interesting situation where, in this example, it seems to be with these pre-built agents, they are now targeting some more domain specificity, like chatbots,
sure.
LLMs are all general purpose. Maybe part of the answer is you tailor your product to a specific thing. Although I also think they want to be like known for the best agentic AI on this front.
Yeah.
And moving on with more stories about LLMs, next we have Anthropic, and they introduced a pretty neat new feature in Claude that is styles. So now when you use it in the web interface, you can choose how you want it to respond. It can respond in a formal way, concise, explanatory, or a normal, which I think is like a mix of the above. So yeah, it's a tweak to the user experience that I haven't seen. I don't think ChatGPT or others have it. Makes a lot of sense, and I guess I'll be playing around with it and seeing which I prefer.
Yeah, I'm excited. I haven't played with this at all either, but I think the style idea. The thing I talked about on our show that I really am excited about at some point is I love using ChatGPT, but what I want are instances, which means the idea that, like, I want a ChatGPT that I can fork off and still control and have, like, the ChatGPT that's my business ChatGPT, or the ChatGPT that's like my personal one, or the ChatGPT that I can talk to myself at age 20, right? And, like, I want a list of those on the left. And they're not really GPTs in the way that they originally envisioned them. They're more like personas, right? And this is the kind of step towards that I think AI is going to take us in. And even when you think about agents, like, I don't want an agent that, like, if I want an agent that's going to go out and research something for, I don't know, my kids, I don't want that to be like business guy. I want that to be like an emotionally, charged person who has an understanding of what I want for my kids. So I think that's going to be a weird future where our own AIs are going to be fractured into a bajillion different things based on what we want. And I think that's where, like, the agentic behaviors and the chat behaviors kind of come to each other. Like, when you think about agents not just as being something that can go out and do something for you, but agents as being something that are a part of you, that feels like kind of the future that we're looking at here.
Exactly. Yeah, I think this really speaks to sort of the other meaning of agent. The one we tend to focus on is the one where they reason and they can go off and do stuff on their own, make a plan. But the other kind of facet of it is this notion of having a persona, of having a persistent identity.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And that's another aspect of agents that is definitely on the rise. And actually, speaking of that, next story, very much related, ElevenLabs is now offering the ability to build conversational AI agents. So ElevenLabs is the service that typically does text to audio, text to speech. They are the leader in that area. And now users can build these conversational AI agents, and you can customize the tone of voice and response length. So kind of similar to, I guess, the ChatGPT chat experience, what advanced voice mode, right? Mm-hmm. This presumably is a similar user experience of being able to talk in a very sort of live, real-time way to an AI with a voice.
Yeah, so we looked into this a little bit, and we're big fans of ElevenLabs on our show. We've been using it for a year and a half now since we started, really. I think this is going to be the future of many things. In fact, Kevin and I are working on a thing. I'll shout out to this audience because there might be probably developers listening. If you are a developer who is interested in working in AI voice, we are looking to connect with somebody who is interested in kind of putting the pipes together of this stuff because we have an idea for it. The thing to me that kind of the reason and thesis that I think this is a big deal is I think it is underserved how much voice is going to be the UX of the future, meaning that I think people are going to start getting used to talking to these AIs. And in the same way that it used to feel weird when you would see somebody talking on their phone in public, and now no one gives a crap because everybody sees it all the time on their headphones. I think that's what talking to AIs is going to feel like. Pretty soon, it's just going to be like, at first you're going to be like, are you talking to that thing? And they'll be like, yeah, I am. And then 5 years from now, literally everybody will be talking to them. So I think it's just all of this is kind of aiming towards this future where, yes, we'll still type onto our computers. Yes, we'll still type into our phones. But based on where everything is going, including even like, visual AR stuff, I really think voice is the interaction element of the future. And I think this is like everybody's moving towards that in some way or another.
Exactly. And I think voice will, like, there's a lot of things intersecting here in a sense where you'll have agents in the sense of persistent AI programs that have an identity and memory and sort of like are your personal assistant that know you and know what you want. And you'll be able to interact with those agents both via text as you would usually, like you chat with your coworkers over Slack, or you can talk to them. I think that is very likely the future, as you say.
It's very sci-fi like, right? Like the one of my favorite sci-fi series is the Altered Carbon series, which is only a couple books in, but it's by a guy named Richard K. Morgan. And like one of the things in his book is he talks about like a hotel has its own AI that runs it, right? And like that sort of interaction where it has this personality, but it's there to kind of interact with you feels like where we're headed to. It's a weird thing as a sci-fi nerd to see this like kind of come to fruition, but it is.
Yeah, Sam Altman famously referenced Her, the movie.
Yeah, of course.
Is very much, if you watch that movie, that's what it seems
that's
like.
That's where we're going. And that movie does not end well, by the way, really, for the person. We talked about that, but it's not a really good ending.
Yeah. And once again, smoothly transitioning to a related topic, the next one is about Gemini and it now having a little memory feature. So the Gemini chatbot will now remember personal information, preferences, and context to enhance user interactions. Seems like the same sort of thing as ChatGPT memory, which has been there, I don't know for how long, but for quite a while now. So now users can instruct Gemini to remember specific preferences and, be able to have Gemini be more tailored to them.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's like, okay, Gemini, you're shipping products that like have been around and these other things for a bit. I guess just give me more Gen Chess, right? Like let's gotta shift. Let's shift up and give me more Gen Chess. But it's cool. I mean, again, your point earlier about the idea that Google's products are all deeply integrated with this now. That's probably where this makes the most sense. Like one of the things I love about ChatGPT right now is it remembers when I want to write something for AI for Humans for the show, and it will give me that kind of like sense of it. So I can imagine if I'm in a Google Doc and I say, "Hey, I'm writing an email to my boss. I need you to remember the tone that I use for that." That would be really cool. And I think that's probably where it will show up in the most interesting way.
Definitely. Yeah. I think being able to tailor how it does email auto-completion is a pretty big deal because, sometimes you need to be concise and not have all the formalities.
Yes, exactly.
Moving right along, next up is Perplexity, and they are introducing a shopping feature for pro users in the US. So Perplexity, once again, is an AI-powered search engine, kind of a big game in town when it comes to AI search. And now they are going to be able to see shopping recommendations and place orders directly within search results, which is something you can also do, I think, on Google. So very interesting to me. The shopping tool is integrated with seller sites like Shopify. and says that these are unbiased recommendations without sponsored slots. Could easily see this being a monetization route for Perplexity, which I do think is pretty important because subscriptions are probably not going to cut it.
I have a lot of thoughts on this. The most important one I think really is that, yes, I think Perplexity is one of these companies that's either going to flame out quickly or kind of take off. And I think this is probably where they see their revenue stream coming from, because as we know, like the big unlock for Google was Google unlocked ads, right? And like specifically like very targeted ads for people, a large part of which is shopping. Now, not all of it, right? A lot of it is services and other things that you can target to specific people. If Perplexity can make this work, if there is real value being delivered in this way to the people that they're buying from, they actually have a business, a real business. Now, the question I come back to in this is, Perplexity is very famous for kind of controlling how many things come back and they own, what those links are. So is there going to be a wall set up so that like you only get a couple things through? And what does that mean for the rest of competitors in these businesses? Two, when you think of algorithmic results, in the past, the internet has become I can I swear on this podcast? I don't know if I can or not. Is that all right?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
I think most of our listeners are adults.
Okay, gotcha. When you think of algorithmic results of what the internet was, it's kind of become a shit show, right? Like there's this sense that like people figured out the SEO to kind of bubble up those results. So my worry with a Perplexity shopping app in general is if I'm getting just 3 results to choose from, or maybe even just one, because the dream of the AI world is it delivers me what I want. How do I really know that that's the best one? I don't know. Like, the Wirecutter made a really great business. The New York Times Wirecutter made a really great business out of like kind of figuring out here's the best thing and here's the most budget thing. Like that was really useful from a shopping perspective. Will Perplexity have the backbone and the information to be able to deliver that? That's my big question. It is a business. Like this is a real business if they can figure it out. It's also a results-based business. So if the results are bad, it's not a good business.
Definitely. And yeah, you're right. In the search engine game, you're always kind of trying to get ahead of the people hacking the search engine for their own benefit. And one other aspect of this to me is it's not very apparent how AI can provide an advantage in this kind of area. Like obviously for research purposes, for in-depth search, Perplexity is the leader because they have really nice stuff. But if you're just looking for noise canceling headphones, I don't know that they can provide much aside from like summarizing the articles that do compare them already, right?
I'll say here's a business that I think would be really interesting. And if Perplexity is listening to this or whoever, I think this is something I would like. Speaking of AI agents, instead of thinking about a place where where you go to search on and bring forth that stuff, I think the more interesting thing is, what if I had an AI agent myself that went out and looked for stuff? Right. And like, that's a slightly different business model, is that like, I've trained my own AI agent. Like I control what it knows and what it wants. I personalize it and I've sent it out to the internet to scour and then come back. That feels like a much better business model for me as the consumer versus one company kind of controlling a pipeline through. And that's the thing I think is going to be fascinating.
And I think we only have a few more, like 4 more stories here. Next is Suno music generation, and they now have Suno V4. So the music generation space has been moving pretty rapidly now, with Suno and Udio both offering very good text-to-song capabilities, and their user experience has also been rapidly evolving. So now they have a new feature called the Remaster for enhancing older tracks, and also Remy, an AI-powered lyrics assistant for edgier lyrical content. And I will say I found the lyrics generation of these tools to be very generic and pretty boring. So V4 is, of course, now going to lead to a better audio generation. You can use it with existing tools like covering, reimagining existing audio, and also personas with musical alter egos. Yeah, one of these things where you do have some space still to improve the quality on the song generation. As someone who uses these song generations a lot, it's still pretty often you'll see weird AI artifacts, and sometimes you see it go crazy, and like you read the lyrics, but the AI is just like producing sounds that sound like words but aren't. So I'm thinking V4, V5, we'll start to see that go away.
So I've spent a lot of time with Suno. We've talked about it a ton on our show. I just resubscribed for V4, and my experience with it so far has been mostly good, not perfect, I will say. And I know Suno is aware that there's been some issues with V4 so far as it's rolled out. The thing that you said, which is really interesting to me, which I've had that experience probably at like 1 out of every 6 generations, which I didn't have for 3.5, was where like you hear the audio and the words are literally just like, it sounds like human words, but it's just garbled stuff. I feel like that's the beginning of a new model, and they're still fine tuning and they're releasing it. It is in general, the audio fidelity is insanely better. Like it starts to sound not like, you don't hear that tinniness that you heard in the audio, especially of the voices before. That's kind of gone. I also agree with you. The lyric generation is not great. And I think if you really want to write your own songs in this, in fact, the funny thing is I'm working on a dumb Christmas album to release at some point about AI, like Christmas albums, just to have that experience. You really have to write them almost entirely on your own. Like I even use ChatGPT, and ChatGPT is okay at it as well and give you ideas, but writing songs is not easy, right? It's not like an LLM kind of fully gets it. So I think that if you're going to use these things, you're best served by kind of playing with the words yourself rather than trying to just kind of spit it out entirely.
Yeah. I generate a song now per episode for the intro and outro song.
Oh, yeah.
And, I try to just give it the topics and, say it's Last Week in AI podcast, generate the lyrics. And it just goes back to the same stuff over and over, like the same words, the same phrases, and it gets so generic and boring. So it's definitely the case that if you want to do something more interesting and personalized, you pretty much have to tailor it a lot to make it actually have good, interesting lyrics.
Exactly.
Next, moving on to image editing and generation, we have Flux Point 1 tools. So Black Forest Labs has been on a roll with Flux. I think just last week we talked about Flux Pro and Raw editing. Now they have this suite of tools that has kind of unusual things you would see in these kind of editors, in painting and out painting. They also have Flux Point 1 depth for structural guidance with depth maps, and this Kenny stuff for edge-based guidance. And also they have a tool to create variants and restylings of images.
I love that. I love Flux. First of all, Flux is amazing. The thing about Flux people have to remember is it was Stable Diffusion people that started it. And if you remember back in the day, when I say back in the day, I think of like a year and a half ago.
2 years ago, yeah.
Stable Diffusion 1.5 to me is still my favorite AI model, image model of all time, because you could do incredible things. Like back in the early days of Civet AI, if you were on Civet AI and you were downloading like LoRa's from there, like there was some really amazing stuff. And you could tell that team that was at Stable Diffusion back then really was pushing forward. And then the Stable Diffusion kind of blow up happened. I'm sure people on this podcast remember like the kind of the CEO left and all sorts of other stuff happened. And those guys went and started Black Forest Labs. And like, it's just very cool to see a cutting edge frontier image model. And by the way, supposedly video model at some point coming forward too, that is really pushing the industry forward in a way. And I think that's great. And again, Midjourney feels a little creaky to me right now, and it feels like they are not shipping as fast as they should. And I don't know if you've played around with Midjourney's editing tools, but they feel a little funky, and sometimes the results are not that great. So I think this is disruptable in a significant way. The interesting thing is I always wonder with these companies, what does the business look like on the back end? Like, the API for images and the API for video, like, is it a business? And I don't know if it is or not. It's almost like, I love that they're doing this and I think it's incredible, but it's hard to figure out where the business is per se. That's my only question. I'm sure somebody could tell me. I just don't know what it is. In fact, if you do know, I'd love you to just at me on at AI for Humans show and just talk about it, because I would love to hear more about what the business on open source video and audio looks like.
Right, exactly. Quick correction, just so it's clear. I may have made it sound like there's a web tool here, and diving a bit deeper, this is actually a series of models. So yes, it's in painting, depth, Redux. All of these things are individualized models, it seems, that are being added to the API. And it does point to, I think, for Black Forest Labs, maybe they do have a pretty clear business case, they also mentioned that these models are going to be available via their partners. Together.ai, FreePic, and now the chat uses Flux for image generation.
And
Grok uses,
right? Grok uses it too. Grok's that's a big partnership if they're going to end up getting paid by them. So maybe that's part of it.
Exactly. Yeah. It seems to me they aren't actually targeting consumer space. They are targeting to be a provider for other tools that are building on top of that, which is interesting. Next, OpenAI just gave ChatGPT a major creativity update. So that's the story. There's a new version of GPT 4.0, which is said to have a better creative writing capabilities. And they surpassed Google's Gemini in the LLM arena briefly. I think then there was a new Gemini that went back to the top. So it points to this interesting time in these chatbots where they're kind of doing more tweaks and more like little updates to improve things more gradually rather than have big releases.
Yeah, I mean, that to me is the best thing, is like if they can just start kind of drip dropping the updates, I think it's the best thing by far. It's hard to know how much this improved. Like, that's the thing that's always tricky with OpenAI's updates. They're like, hey, that writes better. And I've tried it and like, I guess, I don't know. It's like, it's never been amazing. As somebody who's written for a living and done things and been creative, like, it's always been okay and oftentimes gets stopped. And so I wish they were a little more specific about like how they see it doing. Like, I always want one of their videos to be like, this is how we see it, but they're not going to do that. It's just more of an easy drop. I still think this is interesting to think like what ChatGPT has cooked up for like the second anniversary of ChatGPT. Like, is there something coming? Because I it's like you just never know what's going to be coming from those guys. Like, this was kind of out of the blue, so who knows? We'll see what happens. But it's great. I love that they keep improving, which is nice.
And just one last story. We have one about Runway, and they have Frames, which is a new AI image generator they say has enhanced stylistic control and, of course, also nice looking images. So I guess the name of it kind of points to where they're going. Frames is like presumably talking about frames of a movie, the individual shots you have. So they highlight the ability to control and get very stylized images, things like 1980s makeup or mise en scène, like digital portraiture in the classic, in the visual language of classic cinema, stuff like that. And again, as I've generally found with Runway, presumably the idea here is that this would be something that people could use in practice rather than necessarily a general purpose image generator. This is something that in your workflows you may find more useful. I don't know.
No, I think that's absolutely right. And I think, to be honest with you, as somebody that's done a lot of AI video generation, I think that the turning point has come where text to image is fine, but it's really image to video is really where text to video is fine, but really image to video is the thing that is going to be the bigger deal, because with image to video, you can control consistency. You can make sure your character is the same. You can do all the stuff you need to do as an artist if you're making a film. And when you think about like when a movie maker storyboards a film, what they're doing is they're putting the entire thing kind of in some version of images beforehand. So I think this makes perfect sense to me. Runway needed one of these because ultimately my first step if I'm making a Runway video is always I go create an image somewhere else first, and then I drop it into image to video. So this makes perfect sense. I hope it's as good as some of the other ones. The problem that we've had with Runway sometimes, and I know this is the kind of back and forth, is all of these companies, the larger companies, are so controlling over like what you can generate. And sometimes to an extent of like, you want to make, I don't know, this is a video about like a woman in a sexy dress spin around. And it's not like it's anything, salacious, but the word sexy is like too much for them, right? Do you know what I mean? Or like things like that, which feel like it's really hard to kind of find where that line is. But I find myself with Runway oftentimes not being able to generate something without any sort of reason. And I think that there's going to be this kind of fight about like, what you can and can't generate is going to be an interesting thing going forward.
Yeah. And I guess once they have paying customers, presumably what they'll want to generate is going to be one of the major factors. And I totally agree. I think image to video and maybe even more so video to video. I think that's kind of underrated. Text to video is like where all the hype is. But if you want special effects, that's video in painting. That's just saying, remove any blurriness or remove this car from this shot, remove the pedestrians. That's the most useful thing I can think of. And then you have image to video, which is if you want to kind of get a specific visual, you can really control things, as you say, get exactly what you want. And then text to video as maybe like B-roll footage or these kind of niche applications.
Yeah.
Alrighty, no more tools, stories, and we have a pretty short applications and business section that will begin with a pretty fun little story. So once again, we have some OpenAI drama to cover. This time it's old drama going back to quite a while ago. So in the ongoing court case between Elon Musk and Sam Altman and OpenAI, there have been many emails between Elon, Sam Altman, Ilya Sutskever, and Greg Brockman released going back to the formation of OpenAI, and then until up to when Elon Musk basically left and became no longer part of OpenAI in 2018 or 2017, one of those. So you can actually read these emails, and it's pretty interesting to see how these people talk to each other. You can read the initial email from Sam Altman to Elon Musk on May 25th of 2015. It starts with, "I've been thinking a lot about whether it's possible to stop humanity from developing AI. I think the answer is almost definitely not. And if it's going to happen anyway, it seems like it would be good for someone other than Google to do it first. Any thoughts on whether it would be good for YC to start a Manhattan project for AI?" Then Elon Musk responds, "Probably worth a conversation." Sam Altman has another long email that basically describes what OpenAI was at the beginning, this AI lab. And Elon Musk responds, "Agree to all," etc., etc. So pretty interesting to read through. And then later on, when you get to conversations that were going on with OpenAI changing from a nonprofit to a for-profit and potentially being merged with Tesla and making Elon Musk the CEO, that's where you get to some more drama with kind of back and forths. And essentially, Greg Brockman, Ilya, not agreeing to the plan that was being discussed of Elon Musk basically having control as CEO. There was a very long email with kind of a rationale and argument and so on. Elon Musk at some point gets fed up. He says in one email, "This is very annoying. Please encourage them to go start a company. I've had enough. Guys, I've had enough. This is the final straw. Either go do something on your own or continue with OpenAI as a nonprofit." Stuff like that. Very direct and somewhat confrontational language. So yeah, interesting to read. Nothing new, I don't think, as far as what we know. But
I mean, I say that hearing Sam say the Manhattan Project, whatever, 10, 12 years ago, when now there is an actual Manhattan Project being worked on for AI in America, or will be worked on soon, is pretty interesting. The other side about this, I just read the book Character Limit, which is the story of kind of Elon's takeover of Twitter and X, which doesn't paint a great picture of Elon, and I think Elon's a complicated character. And I think you really kind of have to wrestle the idea of the incredible things he's done, the incredible risks that he has taken with his own money to do these incredible things, plus a personality that I think is fair to call persnickety and difficult, right? And I think what's interesting here is Elon has made some of the biggest things in our world today possible, right? And that's a pretty big thing. I had a Tesla for a while. I just returned the lease, but he has cars that are electric everywhere, and that has become a thing. He now sends things to space where the space race was kind of dead. This is Elon kind of kickstarting this conversation with Sam and all these people. And yet the drama of Elon still seems to seep into this. So, I mean, it's an interesting thing just to look back and to think this is how it all started. But also it's an insight into Elon's personality, I think, and kind of shows some of that complications that exist within him.
Exactly. And it does get somewhat nuanced here in the discussions of in particular OpenAI's future back in 2018, when it seemed like Google was poised to really be the leader. And in these emails, you see kind of interestingly that Google is dominating with all the paper submissions. This is actually from Andrej Karpathy, who emailed Elon Musk, and apparently they were talking about having an ICO, an initial coin offering, also to collect money that Elon was opposed to. I guess he thought that would lead to loss of credibility.
Probably a good idea. That was probably smart. By the way, that's the book I want to read. What I want to read is the book, and hopefully somebody's writing it right now. Where did Google go wrong? And by the way, like that book, I think would have some interesting stories to tell. Now, whether or not you could get the stories out of Google, I don't know. But like somebody should write the story, which is like basically around this time. And maybe it's the rise of the AI age, you want to call it. But like hearing the stories about internally at Google, how did they let Noam, I think his name was Noam Brown, how did they let him leave to go to start character AI and not like kind of, it was like in whatever that guy's name who got fired, Blake Lemoine, who got fired for thinking that the AI was alive. Like all of that was happening during this time that they should have crushed this. They should have absolutely crushed this. But like what happened behind the scenes that they didn't is a really important thing.
For sure. And I'm sure someone is writing a book on kind of the history of LLMs. And that basically is 2017 up through now, right? Starting with transformers. And well, there are language models before transformers, but large language models kind of are the story of the past 6-7 years.
Yeah.
And in particular with Google, I keep kind of mentioning that with Blake Lemoine, people forget this now, but the thing he was talking about was this chatbot platform where Google was letting their own internal people kind of customize chatbots and create individual chatbots via an LLM. So they like had it. And then ChatGPT came out half a year later-ish, and that's it, right? Maybe in a different universe, maybe they're first to get all the hype and recognition from the mainstream. Who knows?
By the way, it would make a good movie too, because you can already see like the version of The Social Network where you've got Larry and Sergey on their yachts, like not answering their phones about this AI thing. And then 6 months later, they're like in the office, like pulling off their jackets, like, we got to get serious about this, man. Like, it's very dramatic, I feel like.
Yep. And now on to a few smaller stories. First up, we have a confirmation that Amazon is investing another $4 billion in Anthropic. I believe we have covered that this was an ongoing discussion a little bit earlier, but now it is definitely the case. And so now Amazon is coming up to a total of $8 billion in Anthropic. So there you go, Anthropic looking to raise more money. So this presumably is a nice win for them. And still there is this kind of partnership or alliance between Amazon and Anthropic that seems to be ongoing. And, Anthropic is in a hard spot, basically trying to compete with OpenAI, trying to directly head on compete on both the consumer front and the API front. They're doing really good with the technology. Many would say, like I would say personally, I prefer Claude to ChatGPT, but they are not as well known. And it is a real question as to whether they can survive long enough to be kind of a second player or even a first player.
Do you know how this could get fixed immediately? And I've been asking for this for 6 months, and I really don't understand why they haven't done it. Make Claude the voice of Alexa. Make it. Just do it and do it. And this may, your audience might be like, Alexa's so stupid. It's been around forever. I have 5 Alexas in my house. That we have one in our bedroom. We have one in our kitchen. We have one. My daughter has one in her bedroom. And yes, baby, it's listening to me. So I'm sorry, privacy people. I apologize, but whatever. I got used to it. All I want is a room device that I can ask a random question to, so I don't have to pick up my phone. I don't have to do anything and just say, hey, whatever, can you give me this answer? Alexa is so dumb. It is based on right now, oftentimes if you ask it a question, it will give you like a Blogspot answer or some random thing from the internet that's pulled. Integrate Claude directly into Alexa, and you will immediately have a use case for everybody. And I don't understand why they're doing this. And it must be some sort of like legal worry that Alexa that Amazon has. But to me, it just feels like it is the dumbest thing not to do. We all have these devices sitting in our house that we talk to. Why are they not actively doing this? I have no idea.
Well, yeah, I just Googled this to have a refresher, and I guess you'll be happy to note that there was an announcement that Amazon will incorporate Claude in a seemingly paid service tier for Alexa.
I saw that. Yes, I remember that. And you're going to have to pay extra money for it, which again, okay. But if I pay for a Claude subscription each month, which I do, shouldn't I be able to just port that over? Like, it does feel like, and it's not like I'm going to use a crazy amount of tokens. Like, I'm not going to be overusing it. And maybe if you want to put a cap on me, that's fine. But like, it just seems like a dumb thing that these giant companies exist and they can't integrate this stuff. Like, that feels like it's just a nightmare.
Yeah, and that's another book you could write, and maybe someone already has written it. What happened with Alexa? I think Alexa was maybe the first one, like maybe pre-Siri was sort of what
it was around the same time. But yeah, Alexa, and again, I think a lot of people have them in their homes, and what we use them for right now are setting timers and playing music. Right, that's about all we do with them.
I have one and it's noise. For a lamp control, and I do love it.
By the way, that's even more advanced, right? Like that, the vast majority of people who have Alexas are using it for lamp control because they never bought the plugs to do that with.
And speaking of Amazon, the next story is about their robots. And there's a report now that Amazon's autonomous robots are seemingly struggling to keep up with human workers. So this is with robots that are meant to be used for sorting, loading, and unloading packages, and they're pretty good. They have a lot of robots already in their warehouses that drive stuff around and deliver it around. There's a lot of robots that they have deployed over the last decade. Now they're trying to add these robotic arms and more kind of advanced AI that seems to still suffer, for an example of targeted picking. So you need to go into kind of a cluttered set of stuff and then get a specific thing out of it. Still not quite ready to, I guess, replace human and work better, which I think is worth taking a note of, because this is something we'll be seeing over the next 5-10 years. I think we'll be excited about the LLMs, and that'll be kind of the general purpose AI progress. But then in the background, in warehouses, in trucks, you'll see this automation start really impact kind of the low end of the job market.
Yeah, I mean, this was the fascinating. Honestly, the robotics to me is going to be the future of the next probably 10 years, in that, yes, we'll still have these AI agents and all these things that are really important in terms of this. But like, when you have a robot, especially humanoid robots that can actively work as people, that's going to be a big deal in terms of jobs, in terms of everything else. But more than anything else, like, I think we're going to start getting used to having them in our homes. And that's another weird thing, right? Like, it's like the idea, in the same way that we're going to get used to talking to these AIs, we're going to get used to some version of a robot in our house that can do our, we've already have these robot vacuums, but like pretty soon there'll be a robot that conceivably can kind of walk around your house and then plug itself in at night and then, do a few things for you and then do a lot of things for you. Like that's the world that we're moving into, which is pretty exciting.
Right. Yeah. And, it's going to be one of these things that are maybe more disruptive than people know right now.
Much more disruptive, I think, than people think right now.
ChatGPT is like amazing, and technologically and in terms of what you can do with it is like a new era, really. But at the same time, automation on the physical front may be even more impactful early on. Like, you have 1.8 million people working in warehouses, in logistics, and that's going to start falling, and we'll see how fast that goes. But it's going to be. What
do you think
impactful.
About construction? Like, I was just in my brain thinking about construction. Like, you can easily see construction jobs being overtaken by robots because it has to be precise, right? So like, imagine, at first it'll be like the one or two robots that have to can lift the heavy things for the normal people. Then suddenly you're going to see whole teams of robots putting up buildings because A, they can work without breaks, and B, they can, do the things the same way every time. Whereas a human gets lazy sometimes, and I am a human, I get lazy, or you might get sloppy about certain things, or maybe you're not as good as the best person in your field. A team of like robot construction workers who are very good at doing the thing will just be able to go bang, 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 bang. So this is the argument that like, yes, a lot of the white collar jobs have been kind of sucked away, at least in some ways right now, or even some creative jobs. But the labor jobs, which are really a vast majority of the world's workforce, I think is still in labor, it's going to get disrupted pretty quickly. And when you think about what that means for the world economy and like, yes, will the economy go up because more opportunities and more things exist? Yes. But like when you think about those people who won't be part of that disruption or be part of that rise, it gets to be a little scary in terms of what we could be looking at, 10 years from now.
And I mean, we've already seen robots do this, right? Over the last 50 years, in things like car factories, etc. Yeah. You've seen robots, and the distinction has been that they can only do essentially kind of the same thing over and over. They can't be intelligent. They are literally pre-programmed motions, and they're part of a conveyor belt, and they're really good at like welding a thing at a specific spot. But the thing that they are missing that people do have in areas like construction is the ability to kind of be flexible and kind of rise to the specific needs of a given place. So I would imagine in construction, you have a lot of situations where different construction sites have different layouts, have like a bunch of stuff all over the place. And that's where humans are much better. And it'll take some time. I think you will. I already know there are kind of domain specific robots that can be used for things like painting that are working alongside humans. And we'll have definitely more robots alongside humans for the first kind of while. But then eventually you will have humanoid robots that can do what humans can do. And that's
you know what I want is a humanoid robot that can paint those damn corners. Whenever you're painting, that is the worst freaking thing. I hate painting. I hate taping corners and taping walls down. So if a robot can do that, it's going to save me a lot of time.
Alrighty, and now on to projects and open source. A couple of pretty neat stories here. First one is about DeepSeek, and they now have a reasoning model called R1 Lite Preview. So this is a reasoning model in the same sense that O1 from OpenAI is a reasoning model. It is trained, it is optimized to when you give it a prompt to have 10, 20, 30 seconds of thinking, right? Breaking down the task, planning out the way to answer it, and then doing like individual steps of thinking until it gives you the answer. And so they have this now open source version that people can get for commercial use. For non-commercial use, they haven't released it yet, I don't think, but they are going to, they said. And on various benchmarks that deal with this sort of thing, not quite as good as O1 Preview on the more challenging ones, but significantly better than GPT-4o, the non-reasoning variants. So they seem to be replicating a lot of the performance gains of O1 Preview from OpenAI. And you can go and actually play with this on their web UI, and it's very similar, it seems to be, in practice.
Have you played with it? I spent some time with it. Have you played with it at all?
I have not, no. I'm curious what you found.
So it's super interesting. The thing that's different here, and apologies if you just mentioned this, I missed this, but like it actually shows you the reasoning where OpenAI hides it, right? So O1 specifically does not show you step by step what it's doing. And it's just a really interesting thing to read through that. One of the things, we mentioned this on our show last week, somebody had pointed out that it looked through the reasoning as it asked it how to count how many R's were in strawberry. And when it comes to the third R, the reasoning line goes, wait, there's a third R? Like it's like got this really like human way of like discovering this thing. And what I found interesting about this is, yes, first of all, it's a Chinese company. So you know that they're working in a different MO than the American companies are. Two, I think there was a quote, I'll see if I can send this to you later, but there's a quote from the CEO of DeepSeek, or one of the co-founders, that just came out where he basically said like, look, the moat that OpenAI has is not that big, and our moat is our team. It's who we are. It's not the technology. It's what we're doing as the team. And I do think that's an interesting thing to think about going forward, is that the people who are going to continually develop new things on top of this stuff might be the moat. Like, do you have the right people inside of what you're doing? And, OpenAI has lost a lot of people. Now they've brought a lot more people in, but like, that is an interesting argument. Overall, though, you can do this right now. Like, you can go to deepseek.com and play with it. You get about 50 free requests, which is quite a few. And it's really fascinating to do. So definitely take some time to spend with it over the Thanksgiving weekend, take some time to spend with this and go try it, because it's just fun to see how the AI reasons through your requests.
Yeah, exactly. And you can use it through their DeepSeek chat interface, which is
exactly
ChatGPT
which
one.
I think is at deepseek.com, right? That's where that's their website, or maybe not. Anyway, sorry, you can cut that part out. But
yeah, it's somewhere you can Google it. I think chat.deepseek.com. And also, if you haven't played around with these like thought models, it's very interesting in general to see kind of what they are capable of. I've had like 401 has been very, very useful for me as someone who works in programming and have been working on a somewhat complex project. And I've had super long conversations where we write like complex programs and we go back and forth, and, it's not perfect. It can't do it right the first time a lot of the time, but it can do a pretty good job and definitely speeds me up by like days of work, right? And next up, we have just one more open source story, and it is OpenScholar. It's an AI system developed by the Allen Institute for AI and the University of Washington, and it is designed to help researchers access and synthesize scientific literature. In that domain, it is seemingly more effective than GPT-4o or other chatbots. So as you might expect, it uses retrieval of, they say, 45 million open access academic papers. So you can ask it a question and it can look up among all these, published studies and research papers, and then it can answer your questions with citations to those questions. And I guess it's not entirely surprising to me that it is possible to build something in this domain that is domain specific and works better by just tying it directly to a good database of research and really optimizing it for correctness and precision. So, very exciting. I know academics and people working in research can use this for answering questions. Often you do need to kind of bring yourself up to speed on a given topic that you may not be very familiar with. And these kinds of systems will make it much easier.
I hope they're trustable. That's the thing I keep coming back to. And again, I know we'll get there. The hardest thing I keep coming back to, I worked on a script for a YouTube video a couple of weeks ago, and I used O1 and did a bunch of things. And I think this will help be trustable, but I had to check things again, and it's mostly there, but there's like one thing if I had said that would have been very wrong. And like, that does suck still sometimes,
Yeah. And, obviously for people doing research,
it's pretty important.
It's pretty important that the thing it says is actually true. And there have been funny stories about, things with hallucinations finding their ways into research papers and stuff. So
exactly.
Still, as this is done by a university in partnership with this kind of research lab, Allen Institute for AI, I'm guessing they really optimize it for those kinds of people and probably is tested and optimized to not lead to silly stuff. Moving on to research and advancements, we have a pretty short section on this front today, and we'll probably not be covering it in quite as much depth as we tend to with Jeremy, who goes on for 5 minutes to really break down the details of every paper. Will be a little more high level. And the first paper is, there's a blog post from Anthropic called A Statistical Approach to Model Evaluations, which is for the paper, which has a slightly more fun title, Adding Error Bars to Evals, a Statistical Approach to Language Model Evaluations. So the gist of the paper is, in general, when we cover benchmarks and we kind of cover the numbers that you get on a given test, we are telling you the average of across all the problems, what is the average correctness rate, for example. And that is not ideal, according to this paper. They argue that these aren't sort of the best way we can report performance. So if you look at statistics, you can have more precise estimates of the actual outcomes of a given experiments for evaluations. You can, for example, evaluate multiple times on different subsets of the questions. And instead of providing just the average, you provide kind of the averaged average. And you can also provide the distribution over different scores. So that's one recommendation of theirs, is to do that using the central limit theorem. We don't need to get into it, but the gist is evaluate multiple times on subsets and then look at the distribution over those different evaluations. A couple more kind of suggestions of that type here, where we're talking about standard errors, reducing variance within questions, doing paired differences. It gets pretty in-depth and into the nitty-gritty, but at a high level, I think the interesting point here is that there is a better way to do evaluation that is more precise and probably more accurate and less sensitive to differences in benchmarks that kind of aim to do the same thing. So very interesting to me. I think to see if people will start doing this, it's definitely kind of pretty sensible that you'd want to use proper statistical techniques.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to speak for Jeremy on this because this is not my area of expertise, but it sounds super fascinating. I mean, I was really interested in that frontier math story for a couple of weeks ago, which talks about the idea of like how, it's really pushing forward like what these LLMs can do by creating very, very hard problems. And I think benchmarks in general have always been a weird thing, going back to video games. If you remember, I was a big video gamer, but like, it's never really one set thing. It's like how you test it, what it is. And just for the normal person out there, like, yeah, of course we want better versions of this. Like that seems like the pathway to like better understanding how these things work.
Right. And this brings kind of reminds me of, there have been kind of multiple papers like this in AI academia over the years as we've gone into a very benchmark heavy paradigm. So in reinforcement learning, for example, it's even harder to benchmark than in supervised learning. In reinforcement learning, you like start an agent in an environment and then train it. And it turns out like tweaking one parameter completely changes your performance. It may be that it isn't your algorithm that's better, it's just your random seed is better. So there has been kind of a movement towards that. Now, when you report the performance, you don't just report the average, you also report the kind of error bars, the variance, and this plays into that, and I think makes a lot of sense. Second paper here, this one is a few weeks old, and I just wanted to note it. We'll probably be digging into this more in a scaling episode whenever we get around to recording it with Jeremy. The paper is Scaling Laws for Precision. So often we talk about scaling laws, right? That's the idea that as you increase the parameter count or the dataset size in LLM training, you get a pretty predictable change in performance on the core metric of how good you are at predicting stuff. And here they show that, in quantization, which we also mention a lot, where you train with weights that have a lower resolution, or you actually convert a trained model to one that has a lower resolution for better efficiency, using less space, being faster. What they show in short is that reducing quantization is effectively the same thing as reducing the number of weights in your model. It's similar. So there's no like free lunch here. Quantizing your model, making it smaller, does lead to a predictable loss of performance. And so the takeaway here is that, there's no way around scaling. We're not going to be able to train smaller models that are better indefinitely, or smaller models by way of quantization, for example, of having smaller resolution of weights. Like at some point, you're not going to get 400 billion Llama, 400 billion parameters worth of performance
out of 8 billion out of 8 billion Llama. Let me ask you a question about this, only because this is something, I'm not a super technical person. When you look at this and sort of say, that inference compute argument, that the more the scaling is going to come from inference compute, it makes sense to me that it's not about smaller models, but it could be about smaller specific sets of data or specific AI agents running on the larger models that could give you the sort of behaviors that you're looking for in this instance. Is that kind of what this is saying?
Well, this is saying for a single model, if you quantize it, either previously to or post-training. And I think the post-training one is the important one, where let's say you train a 400 billion parameter model like Llama. A lot of times it's been shown that you can then quantize it, make it smaller, but retain most of the performance. Well, yeah, the point is like there is now, you can't. Yeah, like you're not going to be able to compress it indefinitely without losing performance. So it's a pretty important insight in terms of the current trend of scaling up data centers, right? It's just, we will need to keep scaling data centers to
bring on the nuclear
models.
Power, baby.
That's it. That's right. And a couple more stories in the lightning round. First, we have Cerebrus, which we haven't talked about in a little while. They have a new record-breaking chip that has really good performance on these big models, on Meta's Llama 405B. So they have this specialty chip, this giant wafer chip that is very different from standard GPUs or even TPUs. And on Llama, they're able to achieve really, really fast performance, 75 times faster than GPU-based solutions. And this is by using a thing that is optimized for neural nets, essentially, their CS3 system. So super expensive chips. They are gonna cost millions, I think, to get one of these. And they do have a drawback, which is that you're not able to batch a bunch of inputs. So typically when you're looking at ChatGPT or something like that, they take a lot of individual inputs, compute them in parallel to get a bunch of outputs. And that is part of how they can be fast. Here, this is for a single input, you're much faster. So if you have like an on-premise reason to have Llama or an LLM, maybe that will benefit you, but not necessarily going to be important for GPU users.
Yeah, I'm so curious to know about this kind of like, I don't want to call it novelty chips, but like specialty chips business, because it does feel like, there's a world where these could be incredibly important. And there's another world where this is the Betamax to the VHS, right? Like, which is always a tricky thing to figure out. Like if the vast majority of use cases is on the VHS, even if it's slightly worse technology, is that not going to be the one that just wins out? I think both Cerebrus and I think Grok does something similar to this, right? Like, or they're doing a similar sort of like their own chips. And like I've used Grok a fair amount, GROQ Grok. And it's incredible how fast it is. It really is like the speed of it's amazing. I just don't know enough about the back end of like, can this scale and will people want it to scale? Like that's what it feels like to me.
Exactly. Yeah. Grok, GROQ Grok has their, I think it's like language processing unit, LPU, which is like Google's TPU, but more tailored to language models. And they are providing an API and competing in the API space for fast inference that is cheap. So it'll be, it's a very, I think, big question, an interesting question of whether Grok can sort of take the lead or carve out a space for itself by having the advantage of customized hardware over GPUs. We'll see. Moving right along to policy and safety, just two stories this time. The first one is very kind of specific to my region of the world, the Bay Area. And it is that Sam Altman will co-chair the San Francisco Mayor-elect's Daniel Lurie's transition team. I don't know if this will be interesting to a lot of people. Personally, I guess I was kind of interested in this. So OpenAI is based in San Francisco, and we recently had elections. There's now a new mayor that is coming in to be in charge of San Francisco. And per the story, Sam Altman will be co-chairing his transition team, meaning that this mayor presumably will have stronger ties with the tech industry a lot like San Francisco in some way is the hub for AI startups, especially within the Bay Area. If you're working on AI, you're probably up in San Francisco and not down here in Palo Alto or Mondi or whatever. So this actually could have some significant implications for AI startups in the area, although I'm not kind of nuanced enough in politics to know how much influence Sam Altman will have, but Sam Altman also has been going to Washington a lot, has been talking to a lot of politicians and trying to influence policy, and this seems to be in line with that.
Well, Andre, as a governor of California, I have a lot to say about this. Actually, I do have something to say, which I think is interesting. So I'm considering a move to San Francisco soon, right? Only because I'm an LA person. I've been working here, LA, New York, and I've been in media, but I'm that deep in AI, and I think AI is more specific around San Francisco, that it is the place to be. It feels, again, back to the Web 2.0 world. It feels like the 2002 to 2006 time where you saw a lot of people move to the Bay Area to work for companies like Google, Facebook, and other stuff. I think San Francisco has been through the PR nightmare of the last 3 to 5 years. Started really before the pandemic, but the pandemic made it worse. Obviously, homelessness and all those problems have become a major thing. I don't know a crazy amount about local San Francisco politics, but I do know that Daniel Lurie's one of his big things is trying to like make the place safer and make people feel like it's a place they want to come back. San Francisco is an incredible city, by the way. Like I lived in New York City and Brooklyn, and it is close to New York as the West Coast has, like much better than LA. I think San Francisco is going to undergo a renaissance. And this is just like kind of good timing on Sam Altman's part, because like this is the time that I think it's going to come to fruition. And Sam probably in a lot of ways has a huge vested interest in this, because his company conceivably is on the path to becoming the next Google and the next larger company, where there are hundreds, thousands, maybe even tens of thousands of employees that would come to work at OpenAI. And I think he wants to stay in the city. Now, maybe not, but like I think the city itself is a special place, and Silicon Valley obviously is special in its own way. But San Francisco as a city is pretty magical, and I just think in general this is good timing for everybody if it works out well.
Exactly. Yeah. San Francisco has been struggling in recent years, post-COVID, with like office vacancies. As an example, a lot of tech has been leaving, stores have been closing, and AI has been one of the bright spots in terms of kind of it being really centralized in the city. OpenAI was there since the beginning, I think. And with their ascent, kind of, I know a lot of founders kind of just go there and rent apartments. And there's even like a Cerebral Valley, which is like this one neighborhood where a lot of AI people are. Yeah. And I'll say, don't believe the PR nightmare. It's not like the apocalypse over there, although there are some rough areas. But either way, it will be interesting to see what this new mayor of San Francisco, who defeated the previous mayor pretty significantly in the election just a few weeks ago, what, if anything, they will be doing for tech entrepreneurs and AI. I guess we'll see. And just one more story, a pretty quick one. The title is Biden's Final Meeting with Xi Jinping Reaps Agreement on AI and Nukes. So after they met recently in person, they did announce that they agreed to avoid giving AI control of nuclear weapon systems, which I guess we all want that to be the case. So nice to see that it came to be. And, I guess not a hard concession to make, hopefully, for these leaders. But nevertheless, it's good to know that, that is the plan.
Absolutely. I think that makes a lot of sense.
And just one more thing to discuss in a synthetic media and art story. And this is kind of more a blog post than a news story, but I do think it's interesting. So Astral Codex 10, which is a pretty major blog kind of thing that is read by a lot of types who live in the Bay Area, rationalists and so on, recently had a little experiment, what they call the AI art Turing test. There were 50 images, half of them were AI and half were human created. And they had 11,000 participants try to see which ones are AI or human. like try to distinguish them. And the result was 60% correctness. So, random chance will get you 50-50. The outcome is most people can't really tell if it's coming from AI or not. And people actually preferred AI slightly. And I guess this is not surprising to me. I'm curious if it's surprising to you, Gavin, but nevertheless.
No, it's not surprising. I mean, it's interesting to kind of follow up on that. I saw that Coke AI commercial that came out last week. There was a big story that, like, I don't know if you covered it or not, but like Coca-Cola made a commercial with AI. And I know one of the people that made there were a couple of them and made one of them. And he told me that commercial tested through the roof, like that people didn't really care that it was made with AI. I don't think a lot of them didn't know, obviously. I think this is where the stories we tell around art matter more than the art itself sometimes. And by the way, like, if a piece of art moves me and it moves, I don't care if it's AI generated or not. Like, to me, it's about what my interpretation and specificness of it is. Now, some people might very much disagree with me. They might be like, I need to know that was a human being that did it. And again, I want to know their story. I think most people, when they see a visual thing, they just react, right? They're not like trying to ask themselves first, is this a computer that made this? Is it a human that made this? They're just looking at something. And it's now mostly hard to tell what is real and what isn't. Now, there are some people who can very specifically say, like, that is not a real person because I can tell that they're shading on this part of their faces off. But like, they fixed hands, they fixed a lot of stuff. I think we have to stop, like, part of me is like, maybe we just have to stop thinking about it. Does it matter ultimately? The matter is like the credit and the pay, all the stuff that they use, the training. I think all that matters, but art is art. And I think this is the weird thing that people struggle with forever. Like, people argued that like Basquiat stuff was not art because it was scratches and like collages, and like, guess what? That was art, and it is held up to this day. Or Picasso, like, what, this guy's making this weird cubist looking stuff that doesn't look like a portrait. And like, that's just kind of the world that we go through as humans. And weirdly enough, I miss the AI weirdness aspect. Like, sometimes AI art isn't as weird as it used to be, and I miss that. And I think that was more art-like sometimes.
Yeah, I have kind of a pet peeve where AI art now is synonymous with text to image. And, you could go back to 2018, 2019, and people are doing really cool stuff with GANs, with, Deep
amazing
Dream.
stuff.
And that wasn't text to image. That was like training your own model and doing kind of more out there things. So I think there is, actual artists who do AI. And with this experiment, again, not too surprising. I think it's, time to admit that AI stuff looks pretty good in general. It doesn't look necessarily kind of like the high end of art, but it can look very nice. And
exactly.
Now the questions are more to do with the ethics, the economical side, and not so much with aesthetics. Although, I guess one other problem is the potential for it to flood the internet, and kind of you end up with too much AI genericness, and that would be an issue. Yeah.
One thing I'll say I hear from our audience from time to time is the idea around AI films and movies, and people that are feeling scared about the idea that they're going to take their jobs. I think a lot of people talk about the race to the bottom in terms of cost, and how that can, going back to our conversation before, now that everybody can make music that sounds pretty good, what value does recorded music have in a big way? Now that pretty soon everybody might be able to make prompt to movie, what value does like a story have? And I just hope that like fandom still exists for specific things. And by the way, that could be an AI creator or a normal creator, but like fandom is important, and having like real care about things. And I think people who make AI art will still have those fans and audiences. I think the generic stuff probably won't, which is okay. But if there's so much of it, it might make it less valuable, which is a tricky conversation.
Yeah. And, personally, I'm sure you found being able to make little songs with AI to be super fun. I know, ever since I started doing for the podcast, it's been pretty delightful and entertaining. So you wind up like unlocking new types of stuff that you would have never had before. And
exactly,
that is valuable.
Exactly.
And that's it for this episode. Thanks to everyone for listening. As I like to mention, you could go to lastweekin.ai for the text newsletter. And thank you, Gavin, for co-hosting. I think your expertise was very useful on this one.
Thank you so much, Andre. This is always fun. And if you have a chance, come check out our show, AI for Humans. It's on YouTube. You can find it there, or you can find it at our website at aiforhumans.show, which has links to audio and all that other stuff.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Go check it out. And, if you're new to this show, then we do appreciate it if you share it, subscribe to it, rate it, all those nice usual things. But more than anything, we like to see that people are tuning in and getting a benefit. So hopefully there'll be another episode next week. Sometimes I'm bad at scheduling stuff. But either way, enjoy this AI outro song.
Step into the digital dream where pixels come alive. AI paints pictures in real time. Watch the future thrive. Claude and ChatGPT, the code ignites. In the realm of ones and zeros, where the future brightens up. From sketches to reality, watch the visuals pop. Claude's got a new group. ChatGPT's lit. Revolutions on the airwaves. Our unknowns a future hit. With every update, another boundaries torn in this AI-driven world. New ideas are born, last week in bites where the stories intertwine. Plug in, tune out of the electric puzzle line. Neon lights, algorithms spinning fast. And this week's update, the future's here at last. Claude's learning dances, ChatGPT's on fire. Generating worlds with just a click inspires. Hey ho! AI's a way to glow. From code to canvas, watch the magic overflow. New agents in the field, breaking tech's horizon. AI is the motion with innovations live. From text to visuals, the future's in our sights. Skills pixelated, now imagination takes flight. Claude's crafting stories, ChatGPT's amusement. AI on the rise, there's nothing left to lose. Plugged in together, digital dreams unfold. AI journeys lost, new stories to be told. With Claude's fresh rhythm and ChatGPT's new voice, we're shaping the tomorrow, let's all rejoice. Hyperloops of data blazing through the air. Electric vibes unite us, no need to despair. Detection, prediction, a limitless radar. This is where we are, it's not very far. Plugged in deeper to the fast data stream. Dreams designed to scheme. Feel just emotion, vivid and supreme. In this AI spectacle, part of the dream team. Claude's got new tricks, ChatGPT's in flow. Animating pixels, making gadgets grow. Openness and headlines, drama set aside. In the AI universe, let's enjoy the ride.